Today's episode of Change Agents is brought to you by OnX Offroad. Now, some of you may have heard the term OnX before in regards to hunting. Same company, different app, different utilization. This is specifically OnX Offroad. And if you like getting off the beaten path, if you like exploring where others may not like to go, then you are going to love OnX Offroad. It's the ultimate GPS navigation app for adventurers. When I turn this thing on, where I live up here in Kalispell, it lights up with available trail options that, quite frankly, I never would be able to, probably because I don't have the time to find and explore on my own. So with OnX Offroad, you can find open trails that are near you, even without cell service. And unlike Google, OnX has real humans mapping the trails, providing detailed information on trail difficulty, descriptions, pictures, and more. So whether you're looking for rock crawling areas or checking if your trailer could make it to a dispersed camping location, OnX Offroad has you covered. Plus, you can explore both public lands and private properties confidentially, meaning you can look at them through the app. You can start your adventure with a 7-day free trial and experience the difference yourself. Download OnX Offroad today and elevate your off-roading experience.
There's a lot of Sean Combs out there. You have to keep in mind that I started investigating Epstein about 12 years ago. So I've talked to a lot of people and heard a lot of stuff about Epstein, and I think some of it's right, and I really haven't found corroboration for other things. But I've been told that there was like an Epstein in training with Epstein.
I mean, that sounds reasonable, actually. You know, you don't want to, I mean, horrible analogy, but you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket.
I mean, there are a lot of ethical eunuchs out there that want money and sex, and are willing to do anything for it. So I really don't think that you have a hard time finding Sean Combs and Jeffrey Epsteins of this world. They make themselves known. There's a very dark, malignant side of our intelligence. And I'm sure that they're out looking for new talent all the time.
How can I help? How can I be useful in ending needless suffering? Do not be afraid of work that has no end.
We have to organize a social movement.
We have an opportunity to lead by example versus just talking, hot air. I think the more people in this fight, the more we grow. Eventually it could change. The people are the ones that can make the change.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Change Agents, an Ironclad original presented by Montana Knife Company. Today, we're going to be talking about the connection between the Epstein case and what is currently going on with the one and only Sean P. Diddy Combs. This episode features journalist Nick Bryant, who is returning as a repeat guest to discuss the possible connection between the case against P. Diddy and Epstein, as well as his new book, The Truth About Watergate. Nick is an investigative journalist, podcaster, author, and expert on human trafficking, who is credited with helping expose the widespread abuse of Jeffrey Epstein and his criminal associates. Today, he serves as the director of the Organization Epstein Justice, which seeks justice for the victims of Jeffrey Epstein. His latest book is called The Truth About Watergate, a tale of extraordinary lies and liars, and it is available now. Let's dive in. Let's get into this. Nick, first off, awesome having you back. Appreciate you coming back on. I want to give people an opportunity. First, they should go and watch our first episode where we were talking kind of specifically about Epstein, but how you became the person that you are, digging into these worlds the way that you do. And so in an attempt to let this be a standalone episode, if you could provide like a brief background of the work you have done, if you could discuss the Franklin scandal a little bit, and how you became an investigative journalist who's been able to cover so much in regards to sex trafficking and blackmail. It's a lot to unpack. Sorry, but
Well, do you have a couple of hours?
I have terabytes. Fire away.
It's interesting. I didn't study journalism in college at all. And actually I studied philosophy. And I went to graduate school too, although I didn't finish graduate school, but I started to work I went to the University of Minnesota, and there was the Center for Biomedical Ethics. And I went to work there, and a lot of the things that we were doing was how to spread healthcare equitably, and who needs healthcare, who needs it more than A or B. And so these were the kind of quandaries that I looked at, and I wrote a lot about children's issues. I had a difficult childhood, and I was never sexually abused ever, but I had a difficult childhood. And I started moonlighting as a journalist. And there was this woman who, she ran an organization that helped prostitutes get back on their feet. And she had said that there was a serial killer killing prostitutes and law enforcement wasn't reacting to it. And now she was kind of crazy, so no one in the media, the Twin Cities media, really took her seriously. But I decided, I'm gonna check this out. So I started looking into it, and I concluded there were enough prostitutes that told me that somebody was hunting them, and they were terrified.
Yeah, I bet.
So I put together, I did a lot of research, and I put together a list of 48 women who had been stabbed, strangled, or beaten to death in the Twin Cities over the previous 8 years. And most of them were prostitutes. And that article was published by the Twin Cities Weekly. And after that article, a task force was formed. And I thought to myself, I can actually do something as a writer if I move towards journalism. So, and I was moving towards journalism and away from academia. And then in 1995, I moved to New York City and just started my freelance writing career. And the rest, as they say, is history.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about the Franklin scandal?
So in 2002, I was talking to an editor at a magazine, and he said, pitch me dark stories. And I said, well, how dark do you want? And he goes, dark.
Great.
So, I kind of threw my hands up and I said, Nazis, Satanists. I mean, what? And then that glint in his eye, Satanists. So I had a simple plan. And whenever anybody says they have a simple plan, it's going to get convoluted. I had a simple plan. I was going to find some Satanists. I never really interacted with them before, but I figured, I'd find them. And I go to a blank mass, write an article, and then that would be it. It would be a kind of a slam dunk. Actually, a pretty easy assignment as far as assignments go. And I came across, when you're writing on a particular subject, you're always looking at least I am, and most writers that I know are looking at tangential stories or stories that might be related, whether it's aeronautics or scuba diving. Most writers I know are looking at different tangents. And I came across a cult called the Finders that was seemingly doing very bad things to children. There were 2 finders that were busted in a Tallahassee park with 6 children, and the children were ragamuffins. And a concerned citizen had called the Tallahassee Police Department, and the Tallahassee Police Department took one look at them, and they put all the children in protective custody, and they arrested the 2 adult finders. And a doctor, and then I got this U.S. Customs report on that. And the U.S. Customs agent was Ramon Martinez. And then they executed a search warrant against the finders. And I should say, in the interim, a physician that worked for the Tallahassee Police Department said that 2 of the kids had showed signs of sexual abuse. So the U.S. Customs was served a search warrant on the warehouses of the finders, and they found all kinds of, there was like child pornography, and there was also the finders people would put want ads into the newspaper for babysitters, and the finders would go and do recon on those families that needed babysitters. And there was a telex about the finders purchasing 2 children in Hong Kong. I mean, and they had this elaborate computer system. We're talking 1987. And Ramon Martinez, they collected all this evidence, but then he didn't hear about the finders investigation. So he went to the DC police, they executed the search warrant together. And the DC police told Martinez that the finders had become a CIA internal matter and there will be no more investigation. And that kind of fried me right there. I mean, I kind of thought I knew how the world worked, but that one document just ultimately, it changed the entire trajectory of my life. I was thinking to myself, what have I missed in my life? What paradigm have I missed? Because I could not find any sensible reason for why the CIA would quash an investigation into a very strange cult that was seemingly doing very bad things to children. And that started my odyssey looking for these types of networks.
Which, and this will tie into what I want to talk to you about afterwards, leads into your reporting about Jeffrey Epstein. So if you could hit the wave tops on that, and then I want to jump to something that probably a lot of people would recognize from some modern news clippings.
Well, I ended up spending 7 years looking at a trafficking network whose epicenter was Omaha, Nebraska. And they were flying kids all around the country. And there was a house in DC wired for audiovisual blackmail that was owned by a CIA asset named Craig Spence. And once I realized that that story was real, that it had legs, I had to do it. I had to. And I spent 7 years working on that story. And it was troubling because I could not get anybody in the mainstream to touch that story. No one. And I actually estranged a number of editors because it's kind of interesting. There was cognitive dissonance. I would tell these editors, and at this point, I knew a lot of editors in New York. I'd tell these editors about the story about the network that was centered in Omaha. And there would be 2 things going on in their head. And I could almost see the wheels going around. They would say, this is a horrible story. We need to help Nick Bryant. Or we can just write Nick Bryant off as crazy and, I can go home tonight and have dinner with my family and there won't be any more problems. So the vast majority of people in publishing took the latter route. And I knew that it was a story that seemed beyond the pale. So I wrote a 100-page book proposal, just showing all the stuff that I had. And the agent that was representing me, and it was a big agency, they just immediately dumped me. Within 2 weeks, I was unceremoniously dumped. And then I got another agent who was a gutsy guy, and he sold a lot of stuff that, was far from the beaten trail or beaten path. And he tried to sell it and he couldn't sell it. And that was very frustrating because at a certain point I acquired, there were grand juries that were used to cover up this network. There were 3 grand juries. And I don't know if your listeners or viewers are familiar with how a grand jury works, but grand juries are notorious for being corrupted. A special prosecutor is chosen for a grand jury, and then grand jurors are just citizens that have shown up for jury duty, and they've been funneled into a grand jury. And the special prosecutor calls the witnesses, and he shows the grand jurors the evidence. And there was a New York Supreme Court judge. He had a famous quip that special prosecutors of grand juries have so much power over grand jurors that they can get them to indict a ham sandwich. And that's what happened with this network, and that's what happened with Epstein, and that these grand juries were thoroughly corrupt. And Actually, the Omaha, there were two actually grand juries in Nebraska. There was a Douglas County grand jury, and then there was a federal grand jury that said that there had been no child abuse, and they actually indicted two of the victims on for perjury. And one of the girls, she was 20 years old at the time. She was indicted on 8 counts of perjury by the state grand jury and 8 counts of perjury by the federal grand jury. And she said, I was abused and I'm not going to say that I wasn't. And she was looking at 200 years. I mean, this kid who'd been trafficked as an adolescent, who somehow mustered the spiritual fortitude and strength to say, no, I'm not going to deny that. I was abused. And she was sentenced to between 9 and 15 years by kangaroo court. And the authorities really tried to destroy her by putting her in solitary for 2 years.
That's an amazing story arc to go from somebody who is a victim that comes forward to then be putting in jail. I think most people, to include myself, would not want to think that the U.S. legal system was capable of doing something like that.
And this is a very special woman. Her name is Alicia Owen. And I founded an organization, a 501c3 called Epstein Justice, where we're seeking justice on behalf of the Epstein victims. And she is an associate director. She graduated from college summa cum laude. I mean, just a remarkable individual. I mean, 1 in a billion, maybe.
Yeah.
That can go through not only being raped by perpetrators as a kid, but then being raped by the Department of Justice and the FBI as a young adult.
I agree. All right. So lateraling into the modern era, if you will, we're into 2024. I can't believe I'm about to say this word, but P. Diddy. I can't say it more than once. It's so ridiculous. So I'm just going to say Sean or Mr. Combs afterwards. He has been in the news. His homes were raided by Homeland Security officials. And I'm curious if you could just bring us up to speed on what you know or what you've been able to discover about those things.
Well, at this point, there's 8 lawsuits pending against, should we call him Diddy, Puffy, Combs?
I mean, I just I can't do Diddy. Let's call him Sean. Let's just go first name.
Well, let's go with Combs.
Combs it is.
I just don't feel right calling him Sean. Let's go with Combs. Okay.
Combs it is.
So there are 8 lawsuits pending against Combs. And 2 of them were filed by minors girls who had been molested, young women who had been molested as minors by P. Diddy. And one of them was filed by Little Rod, and he had been a producer for P. Diddy. And he said that there were all kinds of minors that were being trafficked by P. Diddy. And he also talked about P. Diddy's homes being wired for audiovisual blackmail, and other people have talked about that too. And what we're seeing is kind of a Franklin scandal, Epstein scandal, Combs scandal. And we're going to see a cover up here. And I'll tell you why. Because Combs is being prosecuted by Andre Damian Williams Jr. out of the Southern District of New York City. And the Southern District of New York, the U.S. attorneys from the Southern District are considered to be the most powerful law enforcement officials in New York. And it's kind of interesting. Those search warrants emanated from the Southern District of New York, even though they were executed in LA and also Miami. I mean, Now a lot of people would say, well, that's kind of strange, but not me, because I knew who those search warrants were emanating from. And it was Andre Damian Williams. He was the guy who covered up Epstein. William Barr played an integral role in covering up Epstein, Trump's attorney general, by only indicting Maxwell. And then when it was handed off to the Democrats, they only called 4 witnesses in that trial. And those 4 witnesses had only exclusively been molested by Epstein and Maxwell. And at that point, the feds had a list of at least 30 victims. Actually, more than 30. I've got the list. And they had a list of more than 30 victims. And that was a very carefully choreographed trial to make sure that none of the procurers and none of the perpetrators were named. And if there was real justice going on here, it would have been like a RICO prosecution where the procurers would have been indicted on multiple counts of child trafficking. The New York Times wrote an article about 6 procurers. I mean, it's not like we don't know who they are. Mm-hmm. And some of them even confessed to being procurers for that New York Times article. So if we were going to have real justice here, and child trafficking is a heavy sentence. It's 15 to life. And if we're going to have real justice, those procurers would have been hammered with multiple counts of child trafficking. They'd be looking at 1,000 years and they'd roll over on the perps. That's how the mafia was taken down, or much of the mafia was taken down. But we did not see that in this case. As I said, it was a carefully choreographed trial. And Damian Williams oversaw that carefully choreographed trial, and now he's overseen the Combs case.
Yeah. So I had read a report that there were hundreds of video cameras in his home. I'm assuming there is audio associated with that. Can you think of can you think of a reasonable explanation to have that? I guess in the back of my mind, I could say, all right, he's a celebrity. He's somebody who is maybe potentially worried about liability. Maybe he wants to, he'll pitch it under the guise of I'm protecting myself by recording everything that's going on. But then the other conspiratorial side of me is, well, that's exactly how Epstein was doing it. So therefore everything was cataloged and they had leverage on people. Which one do you think is more plausible? Or is there even a reason to have that level of audio video recording in a home?
Well, what people thought initially about Combs was that it was just rappers that went to his party. He would have what was called the freak-off parties, and it was thought that it was just rappers. But actually, there were politicians and big-time athletes going to those parties, people that you would want to compromise. And it was strange that Homeland Security executed that search warrant, because usually it's the FBI that execute. Now, Homeland Security does have an anti-trafficking section, so you could make an argument for that. But when you go back and you look at Combs' history, in 1993, he started Bad Boy Records with a guy named Clive Davis. Mm-hmm. And Clive Davis is about as dirty as they come. There was a documentary made about Clive Davis that showed him to be this benign octogenarian. But it was just basically a propaganda infomercial. Clive Davis is a nasty piece of work. But here's what's interesting about Clive Davis. In the 70s, he was busted for filing false tax returns and also defrauding the IRS. And then he was busted in the biggest payola scam ever. And payola is when record companies give money to disc jockeys and radio stations to play their songs. But that wasn't the crescendo. Was there was a Genovese guy named Pasquale Falcone who was busted smuggling 22 pounds of heroin into the United States. And the feds started digging into Falcone, and they came across all these dummy companies that him and Clive Davis had set up. And at that point, Clive Davis was the head of CBS Records, and he was invoicing these false. Sorry about that, allergies. He was invoicing these shell companies, and then getting kickbacks, and then he would take a cut, and then Falcone would take a cut. And you want to know what happened to Clive Davis after all those felonies? I've given you about 8 felonies, 9 felonies, 10 felonies. It all depends upon how the feds wanted to prosecute it. Clive Davis did not spend one day in jail. Not one day. And he's the guy that took P. Diddy by the hand and started to walk down the yellow brick road. And I have a tendency to believe, how can a guy like Clive Davis be busted for so many things and not spend a day in jail? I firmly believe that he's got to be working with the government on some level, at least as an informant. And if you look at Combs' behavior over the years, he's been molesting minors. He's been raping women. I mean, his freak off parties, there's a lot of weird stuff going on there, a lot of drugs. How has he been able to get away with it all these years? And I would say, look at Clive Davis and his relationship to Clive Davis.
Ladies and gentlemen, this episode of Change Agents is brought to you by Montana Knife Company. If you are a fan of the show, if you've tuned in before, you've probably heard me talking about them. They are an American-made brand. Actually, just down the road from where I'm at right now, about 120 miles away down in Frenchtown, is a man named Josh Smith, the founder of Montana Knives. And if you're a hunter, you've definitely heard about him. My favorite, my go-to actually in my pack somewhere in this room is the Mini Speed Goat. You're probably aware that they have a culinary line. They have a line that you could use for skinning, for fillet, and every use in the backcountry. But what you don't know is that on July 11th, they're going to have a tactical line. The first line, or the first knife in that line, is going to be called the War Goat. I wish I had one to show you, but that's how far into production they are right now. I don't even have one to hold up for you to see. When I do, you're definitely going to see it. And if it's anything like the other knives that Josh and Montana Knife Company make, you can be guaranteed it's going to serve every purpose that they claim it will. Go to MontanaKnifeCompany.com to check out what they have to offer. Good luck getting one of these things when they come available, because, man, they go fast. So be prepared and be on the lookout. Ladies and gentlemen, this episode of Change Agents is a special one, and it is brought to you by Horizon, an American Saga. Horizon is a movie, and it's an epic tale from Academy Award-winning director Kevin Costner that celebrates the courage, resilience, and pioneer spirit that built America. The film features the stories of courageous men and women who sacrificed everything for the chance at the American dream. And I was very fortunate. I was sent an advanced screener of this movie, and I'm kind of the target audience for it anyway. So not a lot of marketing required. I love stories of exploration. I love people pushing their boundaries and their limits and launching into the unknown with immense amounts of risk. And this movie captures all of that. People who truly are on wagons and horseback and walking, heading west for the promise of what they think is a better life, not knowing what to expect, and the struggles that come from that. Interpersonal, physical, mental, emotional, all of those things, let alone the physical battles. The movie captures all of that in an essence of realism that makes it the perfect genre of a Western that I love to see. And I think that you would enjoy it as well. This 4th of July, you can make Horizon part of your celebration. Horizon, an American Saga, with Chapter 1 in theaters on June 28th and Chapter 2 in theaters on August 16th. That's right, less than 2 months from flash to bang on Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. You can also join the Frontier Pass at Fandango.com for exclusive content and tickets. I hope you enjoy it. So you mentioned that you think there's going to be a cover-up for Mr. Combs. If you were the architect of that, how do you think that will play out? Because it's interesting listening to you talk about the Epstein case, how they, be a good way to describe it. They stayed on the yellow brick road publicly as if they were prosecuting, but they ignored or intentionally put up barriers to all the offshoots that could have given the totality of the situation. How do you think that that will work out with somebody like Mr. Combs?
Because Andre Damian Williams Jr. is the U.S. attorney overseeing that. We know that he covered up the Epstein network by only calling those 4 witnesses. So the fix is in. This guy is dirty. He's a dirty guy, and we know that the fix is in. We don't know what the fix is going to be, but we know that the fix is in. And I would surmise that it would be something like what happened with Epstein is he's going to be, Combs is probably going to be indicted on multiple counts, and there might be some other people, but no one really in the stratosphere, because he held parties for people in the stratosphere. But I don't think that people in the stratosphere are going to go down at all. And I think Combs is going to eventually, they're going to give him the talk, I think, that they gave Maxwell. When I say they, I mean our law enforcement. Well, you know, Sean, you compromised a lot of people, and you did a good job, and you did whatever you wanted, and you made a lot of money, but now you're going to have to keep your mouth shut and do some time. I mean, I think that's how it's going to go down. And I would be appalled. I wouldn't be shocked, but I would be appalled if those indictments didn't include children or minors, because we've got triple corroboration at this point that Combs was molesting minors. And people just don't come forward and say, I was molested by this guy or that guy. There was a judge, and he's a district court judge in Minnesota, but he was, before that, he represented a bunch of Catholic churches during the scandals with the priests. And he litigated with 500 different people and 500 litigants. And he felt that less than 5% were not telling the truth. So it's very, very rare for victims to come forward who aren't telling the truth, because you're going to be subjected to, I mean, who knows what you're going to be subjected. I mean, like Alicia Owen, the woman that I wrote about, she came forward and she had to go to prison and be in solitary for 2 years. Now, that's an extreme example, but if the FBI wants to get heavy with you in the Department of Justice, a lot of victims just fold. So it's going to be interesting, but I think Combs is probably going to get indicted. There's a lot of evidence about minors at this point, but I don't think you're going to see the big time politicians and athletes that attended his quote unquote freak off parties and indicted. I mean, that's just my surmise at this point. I believe that the fix is in.
So let's put our super conspiratorial hats on for a second. So Combs is going to go down. He'll be the person who gets the talk. He's told to be quiet. But all of the parties that he held, all the leverage that he has, all the influential people, will the government, again, this is with our super conspiratorial hat on, does the government then approach one of those people to fill that role and create another one of these schemes? Or do they, what do they do with that leverage? Is it just to control them? Do they want to control the narrative? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, Epstein's safe was drilled, and hundreds, if not thousands, of DVDs were taken out of his safe. And I've filed 2 Freedom of Information Acts, FOIAs, to get, I didn't ask for the DVDs, I asked for reports on the DVDs. And unfortunately, this is somewhat humorous. So after Epstein died, the Fed said that the case was closed. So I filed my FOIA, and then I got an email back from the FBI saying that the case was ongoing. So about 6 months later, I filed another FOIA. And although Epstein is dead, the case is still ongoing. So it's going to be very difficult to get that type of material. But as far as someone stepping in, I think that there are a lot of people. There's a lot of Sean Combs out there. And I've been told by someone, and I don't know, you have to keep in mind that I started investigating Epstein about 12 years ago. So I've talked to a lot of people and heard a lot of stuff about Epstein. And I think some of it's right. And I really haven't found corroboration for other things. But I've been told that there was like an Epstein in training with Epstein, which would be very,
that sounds reasonable, actually. You don't want to, horrible analogy, but you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket.
But I mean, there are a lot of ethical eunuchs out there that want money and sex. I mean, and are willing to do anything for it. So I really don't think that you have a hard time finding Sean Combs and Jeffrey Epsteins of this world. They make themselves known, and it's up to who, there's a very dark, malignant side of our intelligence that does this. And I'm sure that they're out looking for new talent all the time. I've been writing about this type of stuff for 22 years, researching and writing about it for 22 years. And there's no shortage of it. I just wrote about a network in Detroit that it was a huge network. And it was, the police had so many leads and none of them were really pursued. And it's called the Snow. There's a book written about it. It's called The Snow Killings. And these guys, and I'm pretty sure that there's more than one. The 4 children were murdered by people that were tangentially related to this network. And most people that are familiar with the case think that it just wasn't one guy that was killing these kids. And the one guy that they pinned it on ostensibly committed suicide. If you look at, I've got pictures of the suicide scene, and it's so obviously staged. It was, the cops or whoever did it could have done a much better job staging that suicide scene.
This episode of Change Agents is brought to you by Mountain Tough. I've done a few things in my life, not all of them physical, but there is one thing that I believe. When I have been successful, it has largely been because of the physical capacity and capability I had at the time. The brain is what solves the problems, but it's only as good as the chassis that it is built upon. And that is what I think the value of strength and conditioning, or conditioning in general, is for everybody, regardless of what it is that you do. If you want the muscles, or the muscle, I should say, between your ears to work at peak performance, you need to focus on everything from the neck down as well. The cool thing about Mountain Tough, or some of the cool things I should say about Mountain Tough, is you can do it anywhere, right? You can, if you have an internet connection, if you have a device that connects to the internet, you can find the workouts that are suited for you. And it doesn't matter what level of conditioning you're starting, they have a program that works for you. Then there's also a community of people that can help hold you accountable, that you can interface with, ask questions, and join in. We all know that doing something arduous is better when you're sharing that suffering. Camaraderie, right? It's a combination of pain and laughter. That's my description of it. And some of these workouts hurt. That's okay. The benefit from that is worth it. If you have a community to share it with, it's going to keep you on board that much longer. So Mountain Tough is offering Change Agents listeners an incredible offer, 40% off on the all-new Mountain Tough Plus annual subscription with the code CHANGEAGENTS. The way that I'm looking at that, it's one word in all uppercase. Go to MTN, that is Mike, Tango, November, Tough, regular spelling.com, and enter the code CHANGEAGENTS to receive 40% off, a savings of about $100 on your Mountain Tough Plus annual subscription. That's MTNTOUGH.com, and enter the code CHANGEAGENTS to save 40%. That's less than 50 cents per day for the best-in-class physical and mental training available to you.
We don't just do the filmmaking. We do everything. We've taken a case study of over 30 projects that we've done over the past 15 years, and we put together what we believe is the most effective and efficient content funnel for brands. They need content on a daily basis. They need to be talking to authentic end users. We want your team to bring its most challenging problems and allow us and our team to apply our proven methods to your brand to take it to another level.
Yeah. Let's jump to something a little bit more modern with you. Tell me about your newest project, The Truth About Watergate. What made you want to look into that case?
It's kind of interesting. I kind of looked at Nixon as evil incarnate. I think a lot of us did. The media with the Nixon administration, it was good versus evil. And when I was digging into the Franklin scandal, I heard some things about Bob Woodward that were very counterintuitive. So I started to look into that. And I know that this sounds crazy, but I've got a lot of evidence for it in this book that I published, The Truth About Watergate. At the heart of Watergate is a CIA honey trap, sexual honey trap. And the burglars, Watergate is a conspiracy within a conspiracy. There's a lot of moving parts. It's very, very convoluted. But there were 5 guys that got busted at the Democratic National Committee on the 6th floor of the Watergate. And one had a key to a desk, and that secretary's name was Maxie Wells. And in that desk, and the FBI conveniently didn't tell anybody about this for a very long time, in that desk was like an album of prostitutes that Democratic VIPs could take a look at. And if they found one that they liked, they'd be directed to the Columbia Plaza, which were upscale apartments about a block away from the Watergate. And that was a CIA honey trap. So when I started, and then when I wrote Confessions of a DC Madam, The Politics of Sex, Lies, and Blackmail, I heard some more stuff about it. So then I just started digging into it. And it's quite a stunning story, because there's been a lot of really good stuff written about Watergate and the darkest sides of Watergate, and also that show that the cover story of Watergate isn't true. But I think that one of the Cuban burglars having a key to the desk, and also their photograph equipment was set up on that desk too, really does demonstrate that at least one conspiracy of the Watergate was to get dirt on the Democrats.
I had a guest on recently, Representative Tim Burchett, and he told reporters last year that he is convinced that many of his colleagues are being blackmailed. How prevalent do you think political blackmail is in our system?
I was really impressed when Tim Burchett said that. I mean, I was really impressed, because I've been saying that for 2 decades. So he is the first federal congressman I know of that's copped to that his colleagues are being blackmailed. It's not really hard to blackmail these people. Alpha males, highly sexed alpha males, have this strange alchemy of arrogance, and that arrogance makes them very, very stupid. I mean, sex and arrogance makes people very stupid. Sex and arrogance makes the smartest of people the stupidest of people. So I think it's going on quite a bit. Actually, I've come to believe that if you can be compromised, you are compromised. I mean, I've come to believe that. And you just don't need sex to compromise people. You can compromise people with money too. And I can give you a couple of examples of people that were compromised that I definitely knew of. Larry Craig was a senator from Idaho. He was a very conservative family values guy. And I wrote a book called Confessions of a DC Madam. And the guy who was running, I wrote it with a guy who ran a gay escort service, and he was providing escorts to Craig. And then a filmmaker named Kirby Dick, a renowned filmmaker, documentary maker, made a movie called Outrage. And he's talking to other people that had liaisons with Craig. So Craig is running, and Craig was in Washington, D.C. for 25 years, first as a representative and then as a senator. And then he gets picked up in a bathroom in a Minneapolis airport. I guess in the stall next to him, someone was slapping their foot on the ground. And I guess that's a signal that, they're hot to trot or something. So he actually, in a bathroom, a U.S. senator in a bathroom, tries to pick up a vice squad cop. I mean, and how hard would it be to compromise Larry Craig if he's picking up vice cops in bathrooms? And it's kind of funny because I'm from Minneapolis, and I go back there at least once a year to see friends and family. And I was sitting on a commode in the Minneapolis in a men's room, and someone was slapping their foot next to the stall, and I thought they had a neurological disorder. I'm glad I didn't say, "Are you all right?"
Little did you know.
I say, can I help you? I'm just glad I took care of my business.
Do you think it's possible to decouple the blackmailing system or to remove this type of leverage? I mean, it seems, the agency, it doesn't surprise me that one of the things the agency would do would be these honey trap type operations for leverage or intelligence, whatever it may be, blackmail purposes, fill in the buffet of what they might do with the information. Do you think it's possible to decouple it, or is that just a byproduct of this system that we are forced to play in?
Well, we have, as Americans, we have to change the system. We have to. The congressional approval rating at this point is 13%.
It's abysmal.
So that means that the vast majority of Americans, almost 90% of Americans, don't believe that their Congress is acting in their best interest. And I believe it's because they're serving other masters. I believe it's because of the blackmail, because of the money. And people think it's just the money, but there's all kinds of honey traps in Washington, D.C. And I started an organization called Epstein Justice, and we're gaining momentum. And what we want, Epstein trafficked little girls for 25 years, and the government has covered that up. And what we want is very, very simple. We want a commission. We want a commission to tell us why the government covered up child trafficking, and then to prosecute the perpetrators. I think if we can get this this darkness out of our political system, I think we have a chance of regaining what used to be an amazing country. America is still an amazing country with lots of opportunities, but we have to change the way that politics is done now.
This maybe a tough question, but let's say you're a doctor and you would have we'll call this a cancer that's invading our political system. What percentage of the patient do you think is infested with this cancer?
I think that the cancer has really spread throughout our body politic. I mean, if the congressional approval rating is at 13%, look at the laws that are being passed by Congress. These laws are trampling our constitutional rights. The spying. I mean, we all know that we're getting spied on, and the government isn't going to bat for us.
The NSA is on this call with us, I'm sure.
I mean, it's just amazing. And the bills that come out that really augment the wealth polarization that's going on in our country, these are that is our government acting on our behalf. I mean, the bailout of those banks and what they got away with. I mean, these things happen when the Congress is no longer concerned about what Americans think.
Mr. Bryant, we're coming to the end of our time. What would you like to leave listeners with for today's episode? Because I feel like you and I will talk again in the future.
Well, I would say go to EpsteinJustice.com. We're gaining momentum. We need some help. And we've got to expunge this. We cannot let our government, when you cover up a crime, you're aiding and abetting that crime. We cannot let our government aid and abet child trafficking. We have to, I mean, that has to be where the line is, that it can't cross that line. As Americans, and I think once we can clean that up, that I think we're going to see a much better future for all of us.
Hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you would like to check out Nick's work, you can go to nickbryantnyc.com, or EpsteinJustice.com. Of course, the show notes and below will have the link to both of those directly. Thank you again for listening to Change Agents, an Ironclad original presented by Montana Knife Company. See you guys next week with an all-new guest and episode. Thank you, Warner Brothers, for sponsoring this video.
Think from here. Something you want to say?
One of the things that I love the most about Horizon and American Saga is that it accurately captures the environment that I think these people were living in. And I say living, I don't think they were thriving. I think a lot of the times they were scraping by the skin of their teeth.
What order there is comes from me watching you and watching his fellow. Seeing what'll stand and what he won't.
And I love the tension of this scene. You'll see it when you go and watch the movie as they are walking up a hill, and I'm not going to give away what it is because I want people to see it for themselves. The tension starts to build, and the one thing that stuck out at me in this scene is once you recognize crazy, you have to do something about it.
Your judgment is...
And it gets to a point where you see Mr. Costner's character pull his gun out.
Walter, he says, and they will take from you and they will keep on taking.
Because he recognizes things are about to turn into a direction where he might have to take lethal action.
You think?
But by Costner's character pulling his gun out early, cocking the lever on his pistol and being ready to go, he is, from a tactical perspective, he's ahead of his adversary. So when the man finally turns around, not only is Mr. Costner's character ready to go, but he has the jump on him.